Welcome to the Human Archive. If you enjoy original science fiction stories about humanity finding its place among the stars, subscribe and join us for the next one. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. Singing Under Fire. Trooper Omek Tassar first heard the humans singing while the mountain was trying to kill them. The western face of Orison Ridge shook beneath another Saravan artillery strike. Dust spilled from the ceiling of the fighting trench, and somewhere beyond the reinforced wall, stone cracked with a sound deep enough to vibrate through Omek's chest. He crouched behind a half-installed blast panel and counted the uneven seconds between impacts. The Saravans had changed their firing pattern again, which meant the coalition engineers could no longer predict the safe intervals with any confidence. Omek respected the adjustment. He wished the Saravans would stop making good ones. Staff Sergeant Delia Stroud slid into the trench carrying a power driver and a coil of sealant tubing. Gray dust streaked her dark hair, blood marked one sleeve, and the knee of her combat coveralls had torn open. She dropped beside the warped blast panel, checked the next impact, and began singing. Omek turned toward her. At first he assumed his translator had mistaken some kind of human breathing exercise for music. It had not. Delia was singing badly in a rough voice slightly too low for the melody. The tune was simple and repetitive, built around the sort of rhythm that belonged to manual work rather than performance. Another human farther down the trench answered the refrain. A third joined him. The next time 3 engineers hauled on the damaged panel, they moved on the same beat. The panel shifted, Delia drove a fastener home, and the song continued beneath the artillery. The Turasai sang too, but not like this. They sang at pair-bond ceremonies in remembrance halls, and after battles when weapons had been secured and the surviving soldiers were no longer in immediate danger of becoming dead themselves. Omek had never heard anyone sing while enemy artillery was actively trying to rearrange the landscape. A shell struck close enough to throw him sideways. The singing stopped instantly. Delia flattened against the trench wall as stone fragments hissed across the overhead armor. Someone screamed in the next fighting bay, and every human who had been singing was moving before the debris finished falling. A rifleman lay against the wall with one leg twisted beneath him. Another soldier had both hands pressed high against the wounded man's thigh. Delia knelt, checked the tourniquet, confirmed the pressure, and called the medic from Red 2. There was nothing musical in her voice now. No amusement, no battle joy, only work. The medic arrived and the wounded soldier disappeared down the communication trench on a litter. Delia watched until he was clear, then returned to the damaged blast panel. For several seconds she worked in silence. Then quietly she picked up the song exactly where it had stopped. Omek followed her back to the panel with a growing sense of unease. He had assumed the humans sang because they enjoyed the danger. That explanation had been strange but simple. The fact that they clearly did not enjoy it was much worse, because now he had no idea what the singing was for. Chapter 2. Because I was scared. The bombardment ended shortly before dusk. The Saravans failed to break the ridge, but they destroyed 2 secondary firing positions, damaged a supply lift, and forced the coalition engineers to replace 40 meters of trench reinforcement. Omek found Delia beside a portable heater near the engineering shelter. She had removed her helmet and was drinking something from a metal cup. He stopped in front of her and said, "You were singing during artillery fire." Delia looked up. "Yeah, probably." Omek crouched so they were closer to eye level and asked why she had been singing while artillery was landing around them. Her expression changed when she realized he was not accusing her of poor discipline. He was genuinely confused. She glanced toward the shelter entrance where engineers worked beneath dim red lights, then answered simply, "Because I was scared." Omek checked his translator and repeated the logic back to her. She had been frightened, so she sang. Delia confirmed that she had been very frightened. "And yes," she added. She set the cup down and flexed one hand. "If I'm breathing enough to sing, I'm not holding my breath. If the people around me hear me, they know I'm still working. If they answer, I know they're still there. And it gives my brain something to do besides imagine all the ways the next shell can kill me." Omek pointed out that radios performed part of that function. Delia agreed that radios were useful, then reminded him that radios did not stop anyone from being scared. When he suggested simply announcing individual status at intervals, she asked whether he really wanted 60 people shouting, "Still alive," every 30 seconds. Omek conceded that this would be inefficient. "Exactly," Delia said. Omek still wanted to know why the information had to be musical. Delia told him it did not have to be. Music simply helped. When he asked how, she thought for a moment and admitted she did not know the mechanism. "Somebody smarter than me can probably tell you. I just know what happens when we do it." Omek disliked empirical habits that arrived before explanations, but he could not call them irrational when the observed result was standing in front of him. He rose to leave. "Hey, Omek," Delia called after him. When he turned, her expression had softened. "You don't have to like the singing, but if you hear it, we're probably okay." A human inside the engineering shelter had begun humming while repairing a broken cutting tool. Omek's neck plates tightened. He suspected the phenomenon was not going to remain confined to artillery. Chapter 3. Work Song. Omek began noticing humans singing everywhere once he knew to listen for it. The next morning, a cargo lifter failed while unloading ammunition from an underground tram. Repairs would take hours, so 4 engineers and 6 infantry soldiers attached manual pull lines to the container sled. A corporal called the first 2 pulls with numbers. On the third, someone turned the count into a chant. Within a minute, the line had a rhythm. The result was not mystical. It was mechanical. Nobody pulled early, the tired soldiers rested at the same moments, and the heavy sled stopped wasting their strength in a series of badly timed jerks. The container moved through the mud. Later, Omek passed 2 technicians repairing a field generator. One hummed continuously. When Omek asked why, the technician replied, "Keeps me from thinking about how much I hate generators." That explanation, at least, required no further analysis. At midday, he delivered a medical power cell to the casualty station and found a human medic humming while she closed a scalp wound on a Turasai soldier. The wounded soldier asked why she was making music. Without looking up, the medic said, "Because if I don't, I start swearing." The Turasai considered that and told her to continue. By evening, Omek had identified a pattern. Humans used rhythm when a group needed to move together, humming when repetitive work threatened concentration, and songs when fear or exhaustion made silence feel larger than it should. They also complained constantly, sometimes during the same song. He found Delia supervising repairs to the eastern blast doors. "Do humans always sing while performing difficult tasks?" he asked. "No," she said. A mechanic farther down the corridor shouted something obscene about a damaged hinge, and Delia pointed toward him. "Sometimes we complain." Omek told her he had already observed that. Delia admitted that humans usually managed both at once. Omek walked away before she could make the explanation worse. Chapter 4. Marching. The coalition abandoned forward position 7 before dawn 2 days later. It was not yet a defeat. The Saravans had shifted armor into the northern valley, threatening the ridge's secondary supply road, and coalition command shortened the line before the road could be cut. The decision was strategically correct and physically miserable. Omek's battalion marched 14 kilometers through wet mountain terrain carrying ammunition, engineering tools, medical packs, and portable shielding. Turasai doctrine favored silence on long movement. It conserved breath and discouraged useless conversation. The humans started singing after the 3rd kilometer. Omek nearly ordered the nearest section to stop. Then he noticed their spacing. Before the song began, fatigue had stretched the column. Soldiers drifted, rushed to close gaps, then slowed again. Once the rhythm settled, their pace became regular. Their steps did not become faster. They became consistent. The Turasai nearest them began matching it without being told. Omek caught himself doing the same, deliberately changed his stride, and found himself back on the beat several minutes later. At the next halt, he found Delia rubbing one ankle and told her he had identified the marching song's function. It regulated both pace and breathing. Delia said that was usually the point. Omek accused her of knowing why singing helped after all, but she corrected him. He had asked why she sang when frightened. Marching, she said, was a different problem. Omek stared at her. The distinction was irritatingly valid. When the column resumed, the song returned. This time he did not fight his stride. Chapter 5. For the dead. Combat engineer Miles Renner died repairing a bridge. Omek did not know him well. He knew Renner was young, carried more fastening clips than necessary because he hated making a second trip, and had once traded Omek a packet of violently salted human meat simply to see whether Turasai could tolerate it. Omek could. He had regretted demonstrating that fact. A Saravan precision drone struck the bridge's eastern support while Renner's team reinforced it. The drone was destroyed seconds later. The bridge stayed standing. Renner did not. The human engineers were quiet for the rest of the afternoon. No humming came from repair stations. Nobody turned lifting cadence into song unless the work required a count. Omek had spent days wishing the humans would be quieter. He discovered the absence weighed more than the noise had. After dark, he passed the casualty shelter and heard singing again, but this time the voices were soft and slow. Several humans sat around a covered body. Delia was among them. No rhythm for lifting, no attempt to make fear smaller, just voices sharing the same grief. Omek did not enter. Later he found Delia alone near the bridge approach, cleaning a cutting tool that was already clean. Omek told her he had heard the humans singing for Renner too. Delia said they sometimes sang for the dead. When he asked why, she looked toward the dark mountains and answered, "Hard things are easier when you don't do them alone." For once, Omek did not ask her to define the mechanism. Chapter 6. When the tool is wrong. The Saravans learned as quickly as the Coalition did. That was why Orison Ridge had become so expensive. Their early assaults had relied on precision artillery and armor pushes through the northern approaches. When Coalition engineers hardened those routes, the Saravans began hunting repair crews between barrages. When supply points moved underground, they targeted communications. Their electronic warfare drones arrived on the 6th day and degraded radio traffic throughout the mountain valleys. Human singing decreased near the exposed front. Omek noticed that too. During one repair shift, a young engineer started humming while working beneath camouflage netting. Delia tapped his shoulder and said, "Save it for underground." The humming stopped immediately. That mattered to Omek. The humans were not performing a superstition. They understood that sound could reveal position. When the tool became dangerous, they put it away. The Saravans attacked again before midnight. Artillery struck communications bunkers, then the northern tunnel, then the ridge road. Coalition units held barely. At 02:17, a missile struck the old transit tunnel behind the central defensive line. The mountain moved. Omek was inside it. Chapter 7. Collapse. The first thing Omek understood was that he could not hear properly. The second was that he could breathe, which mattered more. He lay on his side in darkness while his helmet display flickered through dust warnings. Pain ran through his left shoulder when he pushed himself upright, but the arm still functioned. Nearby, someone coughed. His squad channel returned only static. The tunnel repeaters were dead. Emergency lighting blinked weakly ahead, and the passage behind him had collapsed entirely. Omek shouted for personnel to sound off. Human and Turasai voices answered from different points in the dark. More than 40 people had been moving through the tunnel when the missile struck. Infantry, engineers, medics, and wounded personnel being transferred toward the rear line. The forward route was blocked by a twisted steel support frame buried beneath fallen rock. Delia emerged through the dust with blood running down one side of her face. She insisted the injury looked worse than it felt, which Omek immediately classified as an unreliable human measurement. They checked the map. Beyond the collapsed frame lay a maintenance route that should connect with the eastern tunnel exit. She was doing dangerous work. Another tremor ran through the mountain and the final emergency lamp failed. Darkness swallowed the group. Omek heard the breathing change, faster, shallower. People repeated questions that had already been answered. Someone called for a squad leader who was not responding. A wounded soldier began crying quietly. Then Delia started singing. It was the same rough work song Omek had heard during the first bombardment. A short refrain crossed the darkness, and another human answered from farther down the tunnel. Then another. The song spread until voices marked the space around him more clearly than the dead radios did. One voice stood close to Omek's left. Two came from behind. Several answered from beyond the collapsed support. The crying did not stop because fear had vanished. The frightened soldier simply began singing too. Omek remembered Delia beside the heater. "If they hear me, they know I'm still working. If they answer, I know they're still there." For the first time, that explanation no longer sounded incomplete. Chapter 8. A shared clock. The twisted support frame weighed far too much to remove. Delia examined it under helmet light and decided they did not need to remove it. They needed 6 centimeters of lift and enough lateral movement to open a path for the litters. Omek wedged a pry bar beneath one end. 3 humans took another. 2 Turasai engineers positioned a third. Nobody could see the whole line at once. Delia could have counted. Instead, she used the song. The first phrase established the rhythm. On the refrain, everyone pulled. The frame moved only a fraction. They released together, breathed together, and waited through the next line. On the following refrain, they pulled again. Omek understood what the music was doing now. It gave exhausted people a shared clock when they could not see one another. It told them when effort was coming, and just as importantly, when rest was coming. The frame rose enough for an engineer to drive a support block beneath it. Another cycle shifted it sideways. Rock spilled free. Delia dropped to her knees, checked the opening, and announced that it was wide enough for litters. Nobody cheered. They did not have enough breath left. The wounded went through first. The song changed as the group entered the narrow service passage. The heavy work rhythm softened into something less exact. It became a thread from one person to the next. The corridor turned, narrowed, and filled with smoke from a damaged conduit. Nobody could see from one end of the group to the other, but they could hear one another. A living chain moved through the dark. Chapter 9. Omek sings. The maintenance map was wrong. A reinforcement wall built during the last tunnel repair blocked the expected route. Delia swore. Omek found her language appropriate. They backtracked while one wounded human began losing consciousness and another tremor shook dust from the ceiling. The alternate route was steeper and too narrow for the litters to remain level. They passed the wounded hand to hand through one section, using the familiar rhythm to lift, brace, pass, breathe, and lift again. Omek no longer found the singing strange. He depended on it. When voices remained behind him, he knew nobody had been lost at a turn. When one voice disappeared, somebody called the missing person by name and waited for an answer. Then Delia stopped singing. Omek turned and found her leaning against the wall, pale beneath the dust. Her earlier head wound had not been the only injury. When she tried to move, her legs nearly folded. Omek caught her and pulled one of her arms over his good shoulder. "Do not tell anybody," Delia muttered. Omek pointed out that the others could see her. She reminded him that it was dark. "They can hear me," he replied. Delia called him a traitor, but she did not try to pull away. They kept moving. Delia tried to rejoin the refrain, but dust and pain had reduced her voice to breath. Other singers were failing too. The group had been digging, lifting, carrying wounded, and breathing bad air for too long. One voice dropped out, then another. Silence began moving through the passage, and Omek felt the formation loosen with it. Footsteps lost their rhythm. Somebody asked how much farther. Another soldier said she could not keep going. Delia tried once more and produced only a cough. Omek knew the next line. He had heard it under artillery, beside broken machinery during a 14-kilometer march, and from humans mourning a dead engineer. He had spent days wishing they would stop teaching it to him by repetition. So Omek sang. Turasai vocal anatomy was poorly suited to human vowels. His first line came out too deep and flattened badly at the end. Someone ahead laughed, but only for a breath. Omek continued. The answer came back from the front. Then a Turasai voice behind him attempted the refrain, mangled it differently, and kept going. Another joined. Delia looked at Omek with exhausted offense. "You're terrible." He adjusted her weight against his shoulder. "So are you." She considered that and managed, fair. The tunnel answered them again, and the group kept moving. Chapter 10. Voices in the Dark. The coalition rescue team heard the singing before they found the survivors. Omek learned that afterward. At the time, all he saw was a thin white beam around the final bend. Then another. Somebody ahead shouted, and a voice answered from beyond the tunnel. "Coalition rescue, keep coming." The song broke apart. Relief arrived too quickly for breath. Rescuers entered the passage, took the weight of the litters, and guided the exhausted group into the eastern tunnel. Omek carried Delia until a medic tried to take her. "I can walk," Delia protested. Omek assured her that she was, technically, walking. When she objected that he was carrying half of her, he informed her that she was simply walking inefficiently. Several humans nearby laughed. Delia called him rude, but she finally allowed the medic to lower her onto a stretcher after confirming the engineers behind them had made it out. Omek sat against the tunnel wall while a Turasai medic examined his shoulder. Before treatment began, Delia lifted her head from the stretcher and called his name. "You sing terribly," Delia said. Omek wiped dust from his face and told her she was equally bad. "Fair," she admitted. Then the medic gave Delia something that made her stop talking. Omek approved of Terran pharmacology. Chapter 11. Mission complete. The coalition abandoned Orison Ridge 36 hours later. The withdrawal succeeded. Final civilian transports cleared the eastern settlements before Saravan forces took the northern pass. There was no glorious last stand and no attempt to hold rock simply because soldiers had bled on it. The mission had been to keep the corridor open until the civilians were gone. They had done that. Omek spent the retreat aboard a medical transport with his left shoulder immobilized. Delia occupied the bunk opposite him with 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, and a deep cut above one eye. She complained mostly about the ribs. After several hours, Omek asked whether the tunnel song was an old human military song. "No," Delia said. "Someone in engineering made that one up months ago." That surprised him. He had expected tradition measured in centuries. Delia explained that humans had marching songs, work songs, funeral songs, sea songs, drinking songs, protest songs, and countless other categories Omek did not need. Some existed to coordinate labor. Some carried memory. Some made fear easier to share. Some simply made unpleasant work less quiet. Omek asked whether human militaries actually trained soldiers to sing this way. Delia said some used cadence, but what happened in the tunnel had not been trained. When Omek asked why everyone had known what to do, Delia closed her eyes and answered, "They didn't. Somebody started. Everybody else answered." Omek considered the ridge, the march, Renner's covered body, the black tunnel, and a song bad enough that two species could ruin it in different ways. For once, he did not need a better explanation. Epilogue. Keep formation. 6 months later, Omek Tassar stood in cold rain beside a coalition training column. He had been promoted to instructor, which he considered evidence that military institutions occasionally rewarded survivors for being in the wrong place often enough. 32 recruits climbed through mud ahead of him, humans, Turasai, and 3 other coalition species. The exercise was deliberately miserable. Heavy packs, long distance, bad weather, no tactical excitement. Exactly the kind of training young soldiers complained about until reality explained the curriculum. The column began losing shape on the final climb. Gaps opened. Tired recruits hurried to close them, spent energy, and drifted again. A human near the rear started singing quietly. Another human answered. Then a Turasai recruit picked up the rhythm with the wrong vowels. The pace traveled forward. Spacing tightened. Nobody moved faster. They simply stopped drifting apart. The Turasai assistant instructor beside Omek asked whether the singing was permitted. Omek listened as the column found the rhythm through the rain. "Keep formation," he said. The assistant asked, "And the singing?" Omek almost smiled. "Keep that too."